Hello. Hello. The one that's due tomorrow, the Normandy. I have a little time put aside for it, so if there's something specific that you want help with in the stream, then I can do that towards the end. Otherwise, afterwards, I'm still in Discord for an hour where I can just do a screen share with you. Yep. It's going to keep piling on. Week 7, it's going to get even worse because that's when final projects or long-term projects start. Well, for texturing, it's not going to be too bad because that one, rather than 6 weeks, I think it's only 3 or 2, but modeling is a little larger. Yes. 3 o'clock tomorrow. No, do not unwrap and texture it. Oh. Gave me a heart attack. It's like, oh god. Sorry, Lilypad, I completely missed your messages. Been pretty good. A different theme for the finals. For modeling, it's going to be an expansion of what I'll be going over with you these next 2 weeks. And then you're going to add in elements that I introduce in weeks 7, 8. Weeks 9, 10, and 11 are ZBrush, so those won't be incorporated in. So you're just basically taking what I'm going to be showing you over the next 4 weeks and taking it to a larger level of polish and a larger level of complexity, higher level of complexity rather. And that's your modeling final. Oh, redoing the course. Same dealie. Texturing is different though, or texturing will be different. Well, not entirely different, but you're going to be doing full map sets by the end, rather than first half diffuse, second half edge wear and tear, or second half rather light introduction of specularity maps and wear and tear and tiling. Now it's going to be spec normal tiling in second half, so that right off the bat in term 3 or texturing 2, it's straight to substance. So guy squared asks about homework 1, are you expecting a high poly model or something close to it? Nope, 6,000 tries, pretty quote unquote low poly for what it is. Oh, then you're good, Leslie. Okay. Sorry, ran a little long there. Get my Twitter out of there. So I'm just going to quickly run through the 2 PDFs that I have here for you guys. One is going to be a quick clarification of terms, and then I'm going to break down all the tools that I'm going to be using with you guys over the next 2 weeks. Edit poly commands and modifier stack. That's just a write-up on each of the polygon tools that we've used so far. So chamfer for splitting edges, extrude for increasing mass, inset for placing polys based off of selection towards the interior, normal constraints, so edge constraints, limiting the movement of a sub-object along existing edges, face constraint, limiting the movement of sub-objects across existing polygons, and normal constraints, moving sub-object selection on its local XYZ normals. More often than not, that's going to be just Z normal constraints, or moving on Z to inflate and deflate mesh. But you can potentially move it on X and Y as well. Lily asked a question. Would you be against me redoing the models I did for the last year, but doing them? Oh, sorry, doing them better. Ideally, I would want you to switch out half of the models. Sorry, half the assets, and just completely redo your the environment pieces, like the wall, ceiling, floor. Chad asks, for homework 1 and other projects, how should we approach poly count budgets? Should we try to target the max count? Awesome question. Give me 1 second. I'm actually going to speak to that directly in class, Chad. So, talking about attach detach commands, showing situations where you would want to detach, or some of the effects of separating mesh into separate elements or using separate mesh entirely. This temple candle holder, temple light, that I've been speed modeling in the 15-minute sort of scrum. Not scrum. I forget what I called it, but preamble, that's it. During the little 15-minute preambles, I've just been speed modeling this out. Currently, it's sitting at exactly 1,600 tries. I didn't try for it, that's just how it happened. So the significance of that 1,600 will come into play shortly. But Also trying to change my name so you know who I am. No worries. Spotted Ass, will we be getting more homework today? Yep, but it's a 2-week turnaround rather than a 1-week turnaround. So this next assignment will have 2 weeks plus the usual 2 weeks plus the usual 24 hours after class in order to work on it, and I'll be modeling much of it with you. I've actually already been modeling it in front of you, you just weren't told. So this is actually going to be used, or I'm going to use this as one of the pieces to your next assignment. So when I was I keep distracting myself. When I was modeling this, originally the base and the sort of stone plinth, I don't think that's the correct term, but I'm going to use it anyway, were all one piece. So when I was adding in the additional edge loops to give it its round form, so I went from a square base to a rounded base. Had it still been one complete object, all of the sides of the plinth, and I've already chopped a bunch of this apart, but had I kept it all as one piece, when I added those extra edges in order to get that rounded form, I would have ended up splitting the center faces, or the center polygons rather, on the plinth in half as well. I do not plan to round those out. I'm going to keep them as is. So all that geometry would have been there for nothing. So rather than having to go back and forth, adding geometry, cleaning geometry, if you have an area that needs to be more highly subdivided, i.e. add more edge loops to it in order to get the correct form, detaching it as either an element or a new object helps you stay efficient. And I'll do more and more of that in this class. I've got a couple pictures in here basically doing some draw overs to where you would be looking to split mesh apart. Remember, your key sort of indicators for that is a change in material. So between metal and stone, metal and wood, wood and glass, anytime you have that switch in substance, and I'm not using that word because you're going to be learning Substance Painter later on, it just makes sense and it's a coincidence. So anytime you see a change in material or substance, consider using a different mesh, either element or object. And anytime you see a hard mechanical seam, so an area where the object either breaks apart into different pieces and is held together by a third, so think side and quarter paneling on a car, depending on the make of the car obviously. Typically there is a seam between the front quarter panel, the hood rather, and the front grille. More simplistically speaking, you have different panels for the doors. Those hard mechanical seams, or those structural seams rather, that's when you should be using different mesh. You don't have to do it right away. A lot of times it makes more sense to just start with the overall form and then break pieces off as the form becomes more and more accurate. And sometimes it makes more sense to actually keep it separate from the start. So previously I did a sword. That's definitely a situation where you would want to start with different pieces of mesh right off the bat. For a vehicle, on the other hand, that's something where you want to get the overall form correct and then start breaking it apart, because everything's still based off of that initial form. So doing the handle insets, for example, or if it does have inset handles, which most cars do, you would want to model the entire silhouette of the car, get it correct, get your mesh flow correct, get your mesh distribution correct. Don't worry about those two terms. That's something I'll talk about later on, like week 7. And then you would split the door panel off and start running extra edges through it in order to get that indentation for the handle. So make planar commands with constraints turned on, a visual representation of a non-planar polygon, or a non-planar quad rather. Symmetry command, using it to symmetry an object versus symmetrying across an object versus symmetrying a full complete object, left and right, or up and down, back and forward. And then just talking about flip normals. So the bigger one I'm going to focus on, I won't go over the breakdowns for all the tools that I list here, because I'll be using all of them. The only one that I want to focus on is this clarification of terms up at the top. For texturing and, for modeling rather, and to a certain extent for texturing, whenever I use the word asset, in the broader industry context, so video game design, 3D pre-visualization, motion graphics, motion pictures, it means something different. So in those broader contexts, asset could be referring to a model, an animation, a shader, a material, a texture, a skybox, a camera, a light, all that stuff. Anything involved with the project would be considered an asset. For modeling, whenever I say asset, I'm referring to a mesh or a selection of meshes that can stand alone on their own without anything nearby to give it context. And more specifically, talking about its silhouette. So if I put a flat shade on this temple candle that I've been just speed modeling through, if I go to either giving it 100% self-illumination, so going to any of the materials, and I'll just swap back the scan line so I can use the standards. Let's dab. So self-illumination, cranking that all the way up to white. Does the same thing. I'm just using a PBR. Or rather than going full emissive, you can go to default shading and turn on flat color. Does pretty much the same thing. It's just you have a little bit more control and you don't have to worry about your object colors. Because if I take off my material right now, it's going to be blue. Again, doesn't really matter. Side note on that regarding object colors, so these color swatches, just because I got the question in yesterday's class, the Normandy's colors don't matter. If it's hot pink, that's fine. If it's yellow, it's fine. If it looks like Technicolor vomit, that's fine too. I'm only looking at the actual geometry, the structure of it. So just looking at the actual silhouette of this object, I wasn't modeling off of a reference, which is no bueno, not a good approach to it. But just by looking at its silhouette alone, you can glean some of its structural information from it. So its weight is much more heavily distributed towards the bottom, meaning it's implying that it's an object that has to be set on a surface. If I had a character next to it, or at least a scale of reference, reference or a reference to scale, then I have a good idea of how big the object is. So now that I know that this person is 1.8 meters tall, starts to give you some more clues as to what it is. So sitting on the ground, larger than a human. It's got some hard edges to it, so it's definitely it's either a very coarse or a very rigid surface. So stone, steel, wood can be this polygonal, but typically it's a little more either completely linear, straight up, down, left, right on an angle, or it's got some curvature to it. So this is definitely saying that it's a hard surface or a hard material. If I had a couple more pieces in here and they were all at this level of technology, you would be able to guess it's stone. I've got really thin pieces hanging off the sides, so it's probably cloth or paper. And during this little 15-minute session, I added in the candle flame, added in the candle holder and the candle itself. And I've got this little pike on top just because. And I put a little bit of embellishment by converting a spline to geometry. So this can exist by itself. It doesn't need another piece of geometry nearby to tell you what the function is, what its situation is, when it's being used. It's definitely something that needs to be placed on the floor. If it was smaller, then okay, maybe it's a tabletop thing. But no, definitely big enough. And that's all being done again with only 1,600 tries. And realistically, these pieces aren't even needed. I just like that it breaks that silhouette a bit more, a bit more rather. Now, mesh isn't as soft as I would like it to be. Splitting all these edges, or actually I removed a bunch of edges through here in order to optimize it down. Depending on the distance that you're going to be viewing it at, remember, it doesn't make sense to have an object. So I'll do the old standby of doing a couple spheres. If this is going to be the distance that the object is consistently viewed at, so think locked camera distance like XCOM, or sorry, the more recent XCOM series, Divinity Original Sin, trying to think of some more. I haven't played a lot recently. Yeah, anytime that you're fixed at or the camera's going to be a fixed distance, there's going to be a point where adding more geometry to it just becomes wasteful. I mean, yeah, that sphere on the right is much smoother, but it's at almost 10 times the poly count. So minimal aesthetic gain for quite a bit of wasted geometry. So in terms of poly counts, so this is going to go back to Chad's question from the Twitch chat. Anytime you guys are given poly counts, treat it as a salary, basically. So if you were offered to perform a job and someone said, well, I can either pay you $12 an hour or $18 an hour. All other things being equal, you can actually choose whether you get paid $12 an hour or $18 an hour. I don't think anyone's going to choose $12 an hour over $18. You just want to get as much as you can for the work you're doing. The models are the same thing. So anytime you guys get a poly budget, you don't have to hit it exactly, but you should be making full use of that allowance. So for the Normandy, it's entirely possible to get that model done in, I had one person who not only modeled it, but then textured it. They were told not to, but he decided to anyway. He modeled it, textured it, looked awesome. It was, I believe, 3,800 tries. And it was accurate. Like, he actually went online, found a bunch of additional reference images, and everything was correct, and it looked great. But it was far under that poly budget. Basically, for the Normandy project, that poly budget rather is to keep you from trying to put mesh smooth on it, among other things, but it's to prevent you from adding mesh smooth on. Now with this project coming up, your budget is going to be 1,600 tries per object. That's to get you thinking about where your mesh is actually being used, so to prioritize your placement of edge loops and polygons. So all these modifiers I'll go through, or I'll be using in class. So the topic of today is going to be modular design. So basically making a model that can then be either reused or recombined to get something else out of it. That's the one side of it. On the other side of it is something that we've already talked about, or we've already seen. The first question we ask when we model is it symmetrical? If so, that means I only have to model half of it and symmetry it over. This is taking that one step further. So inside that document, I have some concept art from of the USG Ishimura from Dead Space. And then I have a screenshot of one of the multiplayer levels called Spire from Gears of War 4. And both of these are awesome examples of modular design. So effectively for us, I'm not going to go into the entire theory of modularity because that's something for game design classes. Alan and Jeff love talking about this stuff, so I won't steal their thunder. But anytime you're given an assignment or later on a contract, if you start to see repeating features, so not only do you answer the question, is this symmetrical, you go one step further and say, is there a feature on this that is either derivative of another feature or the exact same feature duplicated multiple times? So for the Ishimura, the side panels that I highlighted in green are exactly the same structure. They've just been given different textures. It is 2D work, so it's not textured, it's painted. The blue blue highlighted panels on the front, the living quarters and labs on the back, and engines, all derivative of one another. And same thing with the not gangplanks, whatever, the crane assemblies. In order to keep the human mind, or the human eye rather, from immediately telling that it's something that's been repeated, and we'll see more of this as when we do tileable textures, in order to keep the brain from saying, hey, that's the same thing over and over again, or at least to sort of delay that response, adding in small variations, so variations in texture for the panels, variations in size for the front blue panels, variations in scale and construction and object placement for the scaffolding. By nature, our brains are evolutionary or have evolved to prioritize or be able to immediately pick out patterns. When you guys are working on on levels, and later on when you do tileable textures, your goal is to get as much done with as little geometry and texture use as possible, and do it in such a way that the player isn't looking at a wall and saying, oh, that's a nice texture, turning 90 degrees and saying, oh, there's the exact same texture that I was just looking at. And that's partly what we're going to be going after today, but on the modeling side. So that being said, Gears of War, a number of areas have been repeated, or it's the same geometry with a slight modification to it. The crown molding is the exact same piece, 1, 2, 3, 4 times. The fifth time it gets a little bit of a bend, and then the sixth time it's the exact same piece. Windows, same deal. Blue pillars, same deal. Can't have a Gears of War game without chest-high walls, same deal. And the biggest example of modularity is foliage. Even with programs like SpeedTree and I forget what the other one's called, Foliage Gen or Full Gen or whatever it is, sooner or later you're going to have to do some kind of hand adjustment or hand creation of plants, grass, bushes, trees, leaves, which can be incredibly time consuming. Between foliage and human hair, those are two of the most time consuming aspects of the model, just because it's not one object, it's one object or one feature made up of a whole bunch of different pieces. So what you end up doing is creating a little, cluster of leaves on a stem or without, depending on what you're modeling. And then you duplicate it and rotate it, scale it, duplicate, rotate, scale, duplicate, etc. You're using the same pieces over and over and over again. It's a lot more efficient than modeling each piece individually, and you can actually hand those pieces off to someone else, and they can build something else entirely from it, which obviously saves everyone on your team a bunch of time. So I have a hard link in here. Excuse me. From the Unity file. So a little old, but it's a good example, and I'm pretty sure that this model set, or model pack rather, is still available on the Unity store for free. Obviously, don't hand it in to me for any of your assignments, but if you want to pull apart something that's already put together, if level design is your thing, check this out. And there's just watching through it, you can see there's quite a few instances where the same object is being used repeatedly. So what's a game or a game engine without some barrels in it? At 16 seconds in, you've got four rather, right next to each other. How do you keep the eye from immediately telling that they're the exact same thing? Speaking about the model only, change their orientation to one another. Don't just have them 1, 2, 3, 4. The eye's going to pick it up immediately. A little bit of rotation, or a lot of bit of rotation in the case of the one that seems to be clipping through the floor. It's all about making a little bit of global adjustment to it, which I'll talk more to in a second. On the truck through shot, the boards on the side of the fence, model, maybe 7 boards, and then alternate front, back, etc. Get more mileage out of it, rather than just mulling an entire fence of 16 meters and then chopping it up. The stick fence, same idea. Maybe 2 different variations on it, then switch which side is facing the player, rotate it, offset it. I think looking at Guy Squared's comment, I'm going to say Guy Squared because it's Guy. I think having the same object is fine, as most games do this, but it's best to not overdo it mainly. Yep. And a lot of this is the same object, same ceiling or same roof siding, or roofs even, same building walls, same building door. This one I'm going to fast forward to. Exact same sword, exact same skulls. Just creating a little bit of variation to sort of, again, keep the brain from automatically, or immediately rather, recognizing that it's a repetition. So changing the height where the skulls appear on the sword. This one's the highest, lowest, and mid. Changing the orientation of the objects to one another. So this skull's pitched down, straight across, and this one's turned to camera. Exact same object, although some of these guys have had more teeth knocked out than others. But same object, just with variations in their placement, so that it's not looking completely static. Shields, there's not a lot that you can do to the model itself. It's pretty planar, it's a simple shape. That's where the texture comes in. Having 5 different textures for the shields, swapping them out for different areas so that the same shield isn't immediately next to the... so a copy of a shield isn't immediately next to one that matches its color. And this one even has a rotation on the center orange shield to break it up even more. There it is again. Something else that's helping things sort of melt together is that it's a fairly narrow color palette, because all this stuff is wood tone. Not many extremes to the colors at all, which you can argue is kind of drab, but putting that aside, the only times that you see spots of color is the fire, the shields, and from a bird's eye view, back to the beginning. So from this shot, all those mastheads, or figureheads rather, on the roof, or out of the front of the roofs. It's the only time that you see bright red aside from the flames. Because the player is usually going to be concerned with what's at eye level, assuming first-person perspective. Usually the player's focus is, straight out from eye level. Player doesn't typically do a lot of this as they walk around. There's a bunch of players that do sightseeing, but for the most part, this is what your player sees most of the time. So they may see those mastheads off in the distance, but seeing more than one at the same time, it's a little less likely because it's so high above the player's typical field of view. Concern regarding what's at eye level. Yeah. English, it's the only language I speak, and depending on the day, I may not speak it well. Valve added barnacles to Half-Life. Yeah, good point. No, it's true. It's very true. If you want to make a player paranoid, put a hazard outside of their field of view. Even with friendly games like Portal, put a spike crusher above the player's field of view. They'll walk onto it, trip it. Yeah, anything that punishes the player and makes them paranoid, always A+. So obviously a lot of games make use of modular design in their actual gameplay. So I used, or the example rather that I used is the base building mechanic from Fallout 4. Granted, a little dated, but games like No Man's Sky, after its updates, does a similar situation. Subnautica, not all that recent, but recent enough. Base design's done modularly. So, yeah, if you want to get mileage out of your work, especially when you're doing environments, think, how can I model this so that it fulfills the role I need it to right now, but also allowing it to be used later on for different projects. Far Cry has something that's really deep, can make some interesting stuff in them. Yep. Sorry, Far Cry having base building, or Far Cry having the Far Cry level editor. Admittedly, I haven't played much since... Sorry, I haven't played any Far Cry titles since I think it was Far Cry 3. Conan Exiles. Yeah. Oh, map making. Yeah. And then some companies take it even further and do procedural generation. So, a bunch of room templates and then a bunch of variables that decide what's in the room, what its conditions like, etc. Without getting into the entire topic of RNGs. So, if the entire idea of modularity piques your interest, and again, if you're someone who's leaning towards level design or level art, hopefully it does, Gamasutra has a good article that I embedded into the write-up, where they go into some of the things that I'm going to be showing you today, some of the things we've already done, but they also take it into a more technical avenue where they're actually doing numerical breakdowns. So figuring out wall distance versus floor distance. They refer to Z fighting as Z buffer fighting. Same thing. Operating with pivot points, modular design, and modular design with bends. Again, a more mathematical approach to it than I do. I just brute force it because, yeah, me and math don't get along. Not as long as we should. Another settlement needs your help. Yup. Yep. So, again, all that stuff is there for you to refer back to, because a lot of people like being able to actually read stuff as opposed to just watching. So, without further ado, bring in that racetrack assets.max file if you haven't already. So, I've already done a couple assets that we're just going to play around with. It's going to allow me to introduce a couple tools to you and one of the issues that you're going to be encountering in this next assignment. So right now they're all modeled out on the axis of X. I'm just going to shift them down a bit. In case someone doesn't have that open, I'll give you guys a little bit of time to hop into Max. I call it racetrack, or is it racetrack? Oh, lovely. Yep, that'd be it. There we go. Yay, typos. So these were saved out in, I think I saved them 2018 format, so shouldn't be an issue with anyone bringing them in. There's no materials assigned, so you shouldn't get the convert to scene dialog in order to switch between Scanline to Arnold. Which one? The lamp or the lamp? So the simplest, or the, depending on when you were born, one of the first examples or one of the first exposures that we have to modular design is with those little slot race car tracks. If you guys have never seen them, which is completely likely, it's basically just small, either battery driven or AC current driven cars on a plastic racetrack. All the racetrack pieces are like 90-degree S-curve, hairpin curve, straightaway, starting line, all that stuff. And then you can actually reassemble them into different patterns or different configurations, depending on, you used to have one of them? Me too. Did you ever take one of the cars apart and start tinkering with it? Probably a good idea. I set a couple engines on fire doing that. Oh. 1 second. Was it not saved in 2018? I'll do it and update it. There, I just made a racetrack _001 inside the same folder. Thought it was 2018. Yep, I just saved it as 2018 format. Someone's in 2019. I had one of those tracks. One time the car flew off and slapped me. Yep. Fun for the older brother and sister, and basically a death sentence for any younger siblings. Yeah. Awesome. So I just drew out a box, kept it relatively within the size of that starting gate. Well, I'm going to treat it as a starting gate. It's actually called banner posts. Just as a width reference. I also did something to the model that's going to create issues later on when I discuss what the issue or what it is that I did to the model that messed it up. You'll notice. So I'm just going to make a little bit of an indentation or an inset to it. So I've grabbed all the edges running front to back. I'm going to go connect settings. I'm going to need an edge on either side, left and right. So I'm just going to make a small little berm curve on the sides. One of the things I like about the connect modifier once you use it, or once you bring up its settings rather, is that after you add in how many segments you want to add to the mesh, you can then use the pinch and slide commands or values to either offset it left and right with slide, or increase or decrease their position on the original object with pinch, so separating them. Either separating them apart or bringing them closer together. So I confirm, do the same selection or a selection in the same area. Because connect was the last operation used, it remembers the settings. I hit spacebar, it repeats it. There's my inset racetrack. So, no big deal so far. Now, even in NASCAR, a little bit of shade here, even in NASCAR they turn left, so having a racetrack of just straightaway pieces is pretty boring. So I'm going to name this as straightaway, or straight track. I'm going to make a duplicate by holding down shift and then pulling on the y-axis. As soon as it comes up, I plan to make this a 90-degree turn, so 90 curve or 90 turn. When the clone options comes up, I'm going to make sure that it stays as a copy. I don't want to be affecting the original when I do this. There's a bunch of different ways that you can go about making it turn. The simplest I heard that over my headphones. My sync is clearing itself, hopefully. Simplest is just to bend it. So there are a couple modifiers that are either local or world space, meaning that they are just going to adjust the mesh regardless of what geometry is underneath it. So it's not being done on a biverse or vertex level. It's just trying to bend, taper, twist, or skew the entire mesh. And I'm just laughing because Shannon said it sounded like someone was bowling. Yeah, that was scary. Scary. So looking to bend, I already said that I want to go 90 degrees, so angle 90. Find the correct axis, so it's not X, it's not Z, obviously it's Y. So that orange box, the orange wireframe is going to show you what the mesh, or rather what the modifier is attempting to do. Bend it 90 degrees. But it's not actually affecting the mesh, or it doesn't seem to be, because the mesh just doesn't have enough subdivisions in order to start turning. So because it's a volumetric modifier, so it's just affecting the entire mesh and using that orange wireframe to warp it, I can go back into editable poly. If it's going to be turning this direction, I need some cuts across the side or some connects across the side. So connect settings. Anytime you want to zero out or minimize a spinner, remember you can just right click it. So I'll add in 7 edges, no pinch, no slide, confirm it. If I have show end result turned on, get something slightly nightmarish. This is similar to the issue that I pointed to when we were doing unwraps, where as soon as you add an unwrap UVW, or sorry, before you add an unwrap UVW modifier, make sure there's no sub-object selection on editable poly. So to the right of editable poly, there shouldn't be the 3 dots for versi, the triangle for edge, or the square for etc. So right now, because I'm in edge sub-object mode, you can see the icon, and that means that bend is going to apply itself only to my selection as well. I don't want that. I want it to apply to the entire object. So I get out of sub-object mode, and there it is. It's not all that useful with its current orientation. Now I could just rotate it to get it to line up, or I can open the bend modifier. The gizmo is the actual volumetric reference that it's using to bend it. So if you start screwing around with it, get all sorts of different effects. But I'm going to go to center, and I'm going to move it to the base. If I want to be completely mechanically precise about it, which I should, because if this stuff has even the slightest gap, it's going to show. I'm just going to temporarily mute the bend modifier, so it's still there, it's just not being calculated. And if I want to place that bend center at the bottom of the racetrack, I can just go Alt-A to align, click the track. I want it to move on y-axis minimum value or bottom value. So Alt-A, click, Y only, minimum. Hit OK. Turn the bend modifier back on. Yep. Actually, sorry, got be there. So mute the modifier. So anytime I say mute, let's just click the eye icon. Alt-A, click the track piece. You can see that the Y handle is the one that's pointing parallel to the track's movement. So Y position only. And you want it to move to the bottom of the track, or you can do it to the top. But I'm moving it to the bottom of the track, so I want the lowest value of the current object on the y-axis. So Alt-A, and then click the racetrack. Yep. Y-axis. So Y, and then target objects minimum. And make sure that you're on, you're moving the center, not the gizmo. So you have something like this. Okay, this you'll have different variations of this depending on how you generate the piece, because I'm about to address this. your center is in the correct position. I mean, is your center at the exact same place relative to your track piece as mine is? That's fine, as long as that center is this guy. Let me do the fix for this piece and then tell me if it changes. Because I'm guessing it's actually based off of what I just did, or what I'm about to do. So, not everyone is going to get the error that I have right now, and different people are going to have different severities of this issue. So it can go from none to catastrophic. What we're looking to be able to do is have our straightaway piece, our 90-degree turn, get the two connected, and then attach either another turn or another straightaway. And right now that's not possible. Again, not everyone is going to have this issue. If you have it deforming oddly, follow these next steps. If your model's fine, don't worry about it. So, what the hell's going on? This is going to be an issue that you will see not only in modeling, but it will also affect your work when you bring it into Unity. So, the reason this screwed up, in my case, is if you're watching really closely when I first made that straightaway, I ended up scaling it. In order to create it, I didn't just use numerical values and then adjust vertices. I actually used a full scale command. You can verify that by anytime you have a modifier that behaves strangely or it gives you a result you had not anticipated. Switch over to your scale tool, doesn't matter which one. And then look at your X, Y, and Z scaling. So just below the viewport. And Epic Pen doesn't want to work, why not? Oh, Epic Pen stopped. Interesting. I haven't had that issue before. Let's go. Can try to reboot it. There she goes. So, watch these three values down here with the scale tool selected. So currently my object has an X scale of 95 point whatever, Y scale of 65 point whatever, and Z scale of 100. So that means that this object currently has a scaling offset on both the X and the Y axes. Because of that scaling offset, any world space modifier or any volumetric modifier that I apply to this, be it bend, taper, twist, skew, as well as a couple others, they're going to be offset by that same value. So because I had a Y squash, or I shrunk the object in Y, that modifier, or the bend modifier, is being squashed on Y as well. That's why it's not lining up with the straightaway piece. So if I was to bring this into Unity, and I had script, or a script rather, in Unity that took the object's length, for example, on the y-axis, and used it to calculate velocity, because I have that offset, that script is going to malfunction as well. So if I were to bring this object in as is, remember inside of Max, inside of Max, we use meters. Inside of Unity, 1 unit in Unity equals 1 meter in Max. If I were to bring this in this object would have a scaling of 0.95, so 95%, y scaling of 0.65, and z scaling of 1. So anything that references to the object's scale would be screwed up. Very unreliable. So I need to set those back to 100%. So I'm going to trash my bend modifier. I'm going to go utilities, so the little wrench icon. And from this list, I'm going to go reset XForm. So step 1, step 2, and reset selected. Step 3. And rather than switch my UI, I'll just write step 4, collapse your stack. When you do, or when you follow that series of commands, so utilities tab, reset XForm, reset selected, and then in the modifier, right click, collapse all. Yep. Now when I switch to scale, it says X 100%, Y 100%, Z 100%. Now I can re-add that bend. So bend 90 degrees. I'm doing the exact same process on the axis of Y. Going into the bend modifier, going to its center, temporarily muting it. Align to the original racetrack, Y position, target objects minimum. And now they fit together perfectly. So anytime you guys are noticing a malfunction in your modifiers, check your XForm. Realistically, once a model is complete, it's usually not a bad idea to reset your XForms. Just make sure that you collapse the stack afterwards. So it's easier. You don't have to, because if you have it centered after the X form has been reset, depending on what your iterations are or what your steps are for the ankle snap, I think mine is set to 5. You can just rotate it 45 degrees and then it snaps on. Nope, that should give you the exact same result. Oh, cool. Send me your file in the Scratch folder. More than anything, I was just using that opportunity to use align again. So now we've got straight away, got a 90-degree turn. Now you can actually start building something. Sweet. I don't know why the submission folder is set to last names, but it is. Oops, center. No, it's the same result I got. You're on the center sub-object layer, right? Not the gizmo sub-object. I don't know what to tell you. And you did the reset X form, collapse stack, all that fun stuff. Just trying to think what could have gone wrong. Pretty sure even if the pivot point's severely off, all that's going to do is change where your center is. So unless your pivot was way off to the side, but you already said that you had your pivot in the center of the track, so after class, well, if you have time or if you have other questions, I'd be curious to do a screen share on that. Alright, well, don't worry, this isn't something that you're going to be handing in for marks. So now we've got pieces to start playing with. So at this point I have a little palette of assets that I can start working with, or a palette of pieces. So now when I start duplicating out, rather than copy, I will set them to an instance, so that if later on down the road I decide or figure out that, hey, I really shouldn't have these polygons here because all they're doing is sucking up my poly count for no good, or sorry, to no benefit, I can select the polygons on one instance, delete them, and even if I have 100 instances of this in scene, all of them will be cleaned. Now, in order to get this stuff snapped together, so it was all built from similar geometry, means it'll line up perfectly. Going up to the top, just to the left of angle snap, there's this white 3 with the orange magnet over it. Click it to turn on your snaps, or you can toggle it with the S or Sierra key. Right click on the 3 to bring up your grid and snap settings. And more often than not, I'm on vertex snap. Everything else has a use, but typically I'm just on vertex. So I just hit clear all. I'll uncheck all the boxes and turn on vertex. That's it. It's a little counterintuitive because you have this button right in the middle, this button center aligned at the bottom of the window, which on every other program or every other time you see something like this, that's the confirmation key or click. This time you just close. The number of times that's tripped someone up, I can't even begin to count it. So now with snaps turned on and set to vertex, anytime your mouse is over top of a vertice, you'll see a little yellow crosshair placed on top of it. So if I mouse over the back corner vertice of the straightaway piece that I just made or instanced, hold down Shift and pull out, there's going to be a little yellow leash letting me know that, or pointing me to rather, my original starting point. And now when I mouse over another vertice, they'll snap together. So I let go, still instance. I'll make a 4 section straightaway, just cause. Sorry, 5 sections straightaway. Grab my corner. Same idea. Snaps on with S. Hold Shift. I'm going to make sure that I'm able to move in all 3 axes. So if you accidentally click on X, Y, Z, X, Y, X, Z, blah, whatever handles, you'll automatically lock yourself. If you just click on that circle in the middle, you'll go all 3 axes. Make another instance. Snap at the straightaway. Still an instance. That's it. Go crazy. So 90-degree rotation, snaps on, pop. Grab this guy. It doesn't have to be one specific area that you're duplicating or instancing from. As long as you make an instance of an instance, you'll be able to go back and forth and make adjustments. So I'm just going to make a couple quick turns. Now, we didn't do any math beforehand, so more than likely I won't be able to get a full continuous circuit. We're just playing around with modifiers. Well, I think I'm going to get close. That's a first. Close but no cigar. So again, didn't do any math, so it's not perfectly aligned. For some reason, this is making me think of Roller Coaster Tycoon. It might be the orthographic view with the track. Yeah, that's a fun game. Crazy fun game. So again, because I didn't plan this out in the slightest, I've got this little gap. So I would just take a piece of the straightaway, either by collapsing stack, clicking make unique, or just making a copy rather than an instance. Okay. If I have a need for a specific or specialized piece of geometry, make it. And you can actually use snaps with a sub-object selection. So I want these vertices to match up with the vertices from my 90-degree corner. Hit S, snap. Maybe put a couple connects in there. Yep. That was always frustrating. Spend all this time getting the entire track looking good, and then you go to connect it all together and it's like, oh, come on. So just a gentle S curve. And now I've got a unique piece. So copy it out. Should probably name it gentle S curve. And make a copy and put it in my palette in case I need it again. That's it. Now, there's definitely more that you can do. If I wanted to make sort of a narrowed straightaway, so I'll make this guy unique. call it narrowed straightaway. Do the same thing. Snaps on. But in this case, I want it to actually sort of pinch in the middle. Obviously, I don't have enough geometry, so the first thing I'm going to do is add more connects. Now, there wouldn't be anything necessarily or technically wrong with going through and going, okay, these guys scale, these guys scale, going all the way down. But there are some tools that will allow you to make large scale changes to mesh without having to go through and adjust each vertex individually. My personal favorite, one that I always jump to, this is my go-to solution when I want to make a fat character thin, change the silhouette of an object without going through and adjusting every single vertex. My go-to solution is selecting the object that I want to modify, open the modifier list by clicking, and then typing in FFD, Foxtrot, Foxtrot, Delta, or just Foxtrot, Foxtrot. And that's going to bring you down to FFD 2x, FFD 3x, FFD 4x. These three are presets. They're just specific combinations or variations of FFD parentheses box. I actually honestly don't use FFD cylinder at all. Can't remember the last time I've used it. But this is, as far as modifiers go, may sound strange, this is my favorite modifier. Whenever I'm changing programs or I'm learning a different 3D program, for example, when I learned ZBrush, one of my first questions was, where's the freeform deformation lattice? Which is what FFD stands for, freeform deformation. And then lattice is dropped. But if I go FFD box, it's going to default to a 4x4x4. I'll just isolate so that I can see a little more clearly what it's actually doing. So over top of whatever object I have selected, it will draw in what's essentially a low poly cage. I didn't even know she was up there. So each of these edges, this entire gizmo that's currently active, that orange wireframe, again, orange or yellow wireframe means not visible. Before I started the stream, she was running around the house screaming her head off. So as soon as my headphones went on, I completely, tried to ignore her. Hey, Mika? Hey, sweetie. Sometimes she behaves. It's always on her schedule. Let's just miss her. So, inside of the FFD modifier, there's a couple sub-objects, just like there were sub-objects with bend. The only one we're really going to ever play with is this first one. So, anytime two edges on geometry meet, it creates a vertex. Anytime two edges meet on the FFD lattice, it creates a control point. So, you can think of it as vertice, functionally the same. So, if you go control points, you'll be able to select those little orange points on the FFD modifier. And by scaling them in, scaling them out, you'll be able to do very quick, very large adjustments to the form without going through and having to adjust each individual polygon, which obviously makes your life a lot easier. So I'm grabbing this entire set. So I don't need to be able to adjust the depth or the height of the object. I don't need to adjust the width, or sorry, the y-axis of the the x-axis of the object. So the reason why I went to FFD box and Peach Chief is actually a little ahead of me. I can go set number of points. I think it's 2 by 5 by 2 that I want. Nope. 5 by 2. Yep. So just reducing the number of control points that I want to play with. And now I can make, oops, making sure I'm selecting all of it. Now I can make that pinch. So, Peach brings up a good question. Can you do the same thing with soft select? Yeah, absolutely. Depending on what situation you're on, sorry, what your situation is or what you are trying to accomplish, soft select will work as well. So if you want it to have a bit of a bubble to it, or a sort of soft curve, so you guys already know about soft select. It's going to display a heat map on your mesh based off of what objects you have selected. In this case, I'm going vertices. Red is going to receive 100% of your alteration. Yellow is going to receive 50%, and then it's going to continue that fall off rate until full blue. So I've given myself about, let's do 0.7-ish bubble. And actually I'm going to just do a duplicate so I can do it with different values. So if I scale in on X with a 0.7 bubble, it's going to give me a very rounded curve to it. So very similar to what I had with the FFD. If I select the same vertices, and rather than a bubble, I give it a pinch, it's going to give me a very sharp result. So that bubble and pinch is just going to control the rate of fall off from your selection. So for pinch, that fall off is faster, meaning that your adjustment is going to lose effect more quickly. Bubble, it's the opposite. And just to throw one more variable in there, you can also turn on or sort of restrict it to number of edges. So for example, if I had my fall off set to be very, very large, obviously I don't want to be able to scale in and adjust those edge vertices, because if I scale those in, I can't attack, well, I can, but I would have to readjust it so that it fits back to the rest of the track. If I turn on edge distance, that's going to cap how many edges away from my selection soft select can affect. So right now it ends on yellow and then goes immediately blue, so that no matter what I do, I can't affect that last set of vertices. So again, depending on what you're doing, your select or what tool you use is going to be different. If this were a character, for example, so I'm pretty sure I have a base mesh visible. And Windows has been so slow recently. There it is. So if I had a character, same sort of idea. I want to give him a paunch. And don't worry, you guys won't be doing characters until second term, or sorry, second year rather. You know, give him a bit of a gut. Give him some love handles. Or do the same thing with an FFD. It really depends on what you want to do. So I could grab character's torso. So if I want to immediately make this guy like, you know, Muscle Beach, or someone from Muscle Beach rather. Take off my soft select because I don't want to combine them. FFD 3x3. And I can start, you know, giving him really massive shoulders, massive lats, and then, you know, itty bitty waist. And then obviously I'd have to go back and adjust his head and everything else to scale up with him. But depends. I personally love the FFD tool just because it's customizable. You can set restrictions on it. You can combine it with soft select. I turn soft select on. Same idea. We'll make them super thin. Bring that gut back. A little weight around the middle is a sign of comfortable living. That's what I keep telling myself. Like I said, different situations are going to respond to different tools, or will react differently to different tools. So, play around with it. That align tool, sorry, completely skipped a step. Instancing out all the pieces. Obviously you can do something that's unique to you. So duplicate, duplicate. Again, I'm keeping them as instances so I don't end up with an error on one and having to fix it multiple times. That's always a big pain in the butt. You may be wondering what the deal is with this post with target. I'll show you why it exists the way it does. So I'm just going to populate with it a little bit. So the purpose of that post with target, part of the idea of having a modular design is to be able to break pieces apart and reassemble them differently. You've got one base piece and two options to work with. So I could go grab the lamp, make an instance, Alt-A to bring up a line. Nice thing about the align tool is that it can actually target objects inside of a group. So this polygon post has a dummy group to it. If I target the dummy, move on all three axes, go pivot to pivot, pivot to center, just make sure current object's pivot is selected. If you try doing local rotation axes, it won't quite work. But give it a 90-degree turn, you're set. Go back to the original. Effect pivot only. Rotate it 90 degrees. Do the same thing again. Instance. target. So rather than having to spend all that time modifying individual objects, modifying different meshes, just building them in pieces, either using angle snaps or target snaps, well, not target snaps, target aligns. You can build things out very quickly. Yep. So just duplicate, well, I'll do it with the flag next. And I accidentally left the Xform modifier on there, so I just took it off. So instance, just so that you're not placing your master copy somewhere in the world. Alt-A, or clicking on the Align tool. Target where you want it to go. So again, I've set this up so that we can just click on the group. Then you're moving on all three axes, X, Y, Z. And you're moving, in this case, I'll go pivot to center. Pivot to pivot works too. And then just give it a rotation. Yep. Now, I've adjusted the lamp's head, or the lamp head rather, so I didn't have to re-rotate it by hand, because by default, when I aligned it, it came in like that. So grab the object, pivot point only mode, pivot point edit mode. So insert on the keyboard, or you can go hierarchy, effect pivot only. Rotate the x-axis to be running along the length of the pole. That's it. Now, something to be careful with, if I'm not mistaken, that Xform was preparing what I am about to do. So we have the same issue with the flag, or the pennant as I called it. Effect pivot only. X-axis is playing all the way over here, not that useful. If I start rotating it, well, that's definitely wrong. Original, or before, after. Something's messed up. Remember, anytime your mesh starts behaving awkwardly or in a way that you did not anticipate. So right now, our anticipation should be that the mesh doesn't move, just the pivot point does. What's going on? First thing to check, switch to your scale tool. Look at your XYZ scaling information, or scaling offsets. 100% X, 100% Y, 707% Z. Well, that's definitely wrong. Utilities, reset Xform, reset selected, collapse stack. The only bad thing about resetting Xform is that it needs to be done before you start populating. There are ways around it, but to be straightforward, just check your Xform before you start duplicating. Because right now, so I've just added the I've just hit reset selected. Remember that Max reads its modifier list bottom to top. So edit poly is still bolded, so any adjustments I make to this to this object will carry over to the others in scene inside of editable poly. But those can get really, really dirty. It's not supposed to be done that way. this bold line means that Max reads that bold line as, and then for this mesh only, apply the modifiers above. So only this model is getting the X-form reset. Collapse. Yep. It's no longer linked to this one, which means this one's no longer any good. Now I can go X-form, make sure it's rotated correctly. Duplicate. Alt-A to target. Done. Hell of a lot faster than trying to do this sort of stuff by hand. So it's not quite automation, but it is handy. So I've ended up with all these different pieces that I can then hand to you guys. You can hand to someone else in your group when you guys do group projects or your group games. And they can use the models that you've created in order to rearrange, create a new variation, build out their levels. Guess what you're going to be doing in year 2. Now, it's pretty, well, aside from the lamp post, or lamp head rather, fairly low poly, because everything is instanced. If I decide that, you know, I want to add some more detail to this, you know, add a couple connects, grab these guys and set them by polygon, do an inset, or sorry, do a connect on those new edges, scale these guys up. Do an extrude and bevel. As I make those adjustments, all the other ones update because of that bold, because that modifier is in bold. As in any kind of considerations or pitfalls for it, certain modifiers won't copy across an instance. So resetting an X-form is one of them. Correct. So check your X-form or your scaling offsets before you start populating. Yeah. It's a fun modifier, or sorry, fun workflow to work in. So I currently have, well, we'll say 450. Guys are section 2. I'm going to give you guys to 450, sorry, 5 o'clock rather, 10 minutes. Play around with this, you know, get a hang of the different commands. Between now and 5 o'clock, either this 3DCO Max file that you've been playing in, or if you want, use the WIP or work in progress model that you have for homework and submit it to to your section's attendance folder on FOL. So section 2 attendance, or attendance section 2 rather. It's not something that I'm going to specifically be looking at, so don't worry about whether or not it's, you know, a high quality model or anything like that. Again, I'm just playing around too. Scratch. Yeah. And just name it your Twitch name. Either your Twitch name or your Discord name. Yep. Whatever your name is showing up as currently inside of Modeling Voice Chat. Yep, that works. I'm giving you your homework and, well, break. I'm giving you your homework and I'm going to start working on it with you. Yep. Oh, click on the name attendance 2, not your submission dropdown. So once again, I'll switch to student view. Got it, cool. Yeah, section 1 yesterday showed me, or had to walk me through that because, yeah, it's been a while since I was a student. I just put a response to Mixart via text inside of the Twitch chat. So yeah, just submitting, again, random file into the attendance folder for your section. And in case you missed my response on Discord, it's you have to click on the actual name of attendance 2 submission, not where it lists how many submissions you've made. The attendance is the only folder that I have set up. Sorry, the attendance and the Scratch folders are the only folders I have set up to retain all of your submissions. For any of the homeworks, if you're a little worried about your about your internet connection strength, you can just submit what you have done one day, come back to it later on, work on it, resubmit, it'll overwrite your old submission so that I'll only have access, or I'll only see your most recent. It minimizes the chances of me accidentally grading a work in progress. Minimizes, if not removing. That was pretty fast. So if you don't follow along in class and just pay attention, should we just do it later on or give a random file? Raktastic. You can even make a txt. So like right click, new, ddd, well, sure. Which I already have on my desktop apparently. Yeah, there it is. And submit that to the Dropbox. Or, yeah, to attendance folder. I sent a doc, that's good. Did not do that last week. I don't think I ran attendance last week. I'm pretty sure I ran it week 1 and now week 3. Yep, you're a fine guy. Don't say that about yourself. Even jokingly. There's too many people in the world who would take that as sincere. So I've made the homework folder the homework write-up rather visible to you guys. I'm going to go over the write-up. I'm going to show you guys some examples from submitted by previous students, and then I'll go about starting to build it. No, it can be nothing wrong. Exactly. This one, Jamie's got the right of it. Yep. No worries. My brain works on a different way, playing the most fair. No worries. Like I said, I only speak one language, and depending on the day that you catch me, I may or may not be fluent. So, this is your next assignment. Yep. A room. This person took it a little beyond. And if I were to select any of these objects, hopefully, go into their modifier list. Editable poly is bolded, meaning that if I select something, start adjusting it. And this will be exactly what I do with your submission when they come in. Grab some vertices, and I should see something like this happen. some drapery. Everything is an instance, or should be. I'm pretty sure this example is pretty good for it. Super low poly. I wouldn't recommend trying anything that's organic. So if you're doing a statue, don't do a human statue. I know that limits things, but just there's too many principles behind doing an organic model for you guys to attempt it at this point. So completed scene or set with the camera in it, and then each of the individual pieces. So this could be handed to someone. They could build out their own variation on this. Exactly. So you can see this one's actually no longer instanced. I'd have to find one that is. Plop it. This is simultaneously the scariest yet most comprehensible assignment I have ever seen. Mad respect to the person who submit this. Oh, you haven't seen anything yet. Don't get me wrong, this is really well done. Very well done. They did have small misses with some of their instancing, but very well done. One of the highest marks in their class. So I'm going to go through the write-up now that I've sort of just splashed you with what it actually is. So I'll just do high level on the assignment write-up, and I'll dive into it with the examples. So again, this is going to be a 2-week assignment. So you have from today, 2 weeks plus 24 hours to work on this. It's going to be worth 15% of your overall grade. And again, a permutation of this is going to be your final. So my suggestion is, or my recommendation, if you don't have something specific in mind, is using the Pantheon in Rome as your key source, or key point of reference rather. Construct an indoor scene using at least 2 reference images, which you'll be submitting to me. A complete interior structure which is constructed of pieces of wall and ceiling duplicated repeatedly to complete the structure, with 1.8 meters as the height of the average occupant. You can also use your own height if you want. I think the average height of a Canadian male, regardless of gender, is 1.78, 1.76 or something. If you want to use your own height, so I used 1.8 meters. Selection of at least 6 objects or assets. Remember, whenever I say asset, I'm referring to an object that can stand on its own and define its function by silhouette only. If it's something with a lot of interior detail, that would be an exception, but obviously that becomes a little more difficult. And those 6 assets are to be duplicated and populate the interior environment, being sure to use instances instead of copies. So that little asterisk that I had after the Pantheon in Rome is that you may choose to do another structure as long as it fulfills the criteria of the assignment. So modularly built, 6 interior pieces, and takes the form of a regal or temple hallway, grand and worthy of the sovereign or gods for which it was built. Basically anything from roughly the 14th to 16th century is usually a good area to shoot for. Ancient Rome would also be a good one, but basically the older technology, the older architecture has a lot of simple curve to it. It's not like too elaborate, but it does have a lot of areas where it gets embellished and it has a lot of silhouette break to it. Whereas if you go too high tech, everything becomes super streamlined. It has to do with a lot of inset detail, and you can't really tell what anything is by silhouette alone. So I've had people attempt to do sort of, for example, the Emperor Palpatine's throne room from Third Empire Strikes Back, for example. It's doable. It's going to be incredibly difficult just because, again, everything's so like cleaned away. So don't. My recommendation would be don't do it. Similarly, if you go too early in time, everything's too crude and rudimentary, and it's not going to have any silhouette to it either. So the golden zone, more or less, is 14th to 16th century or ancient Rome. Would I die if I did the Sedlic Ossuary? I have no idea what that even is, to be honest. Oh, sweet, merciful God. No blasphemy intended, but yeah. Yeah, that would, that would be self-defenestration right there. Yeah. I'm a little disappointed that I didn't know about this. Sorry, I'm markedly disappointed that I didn't know about this. According to Rectastic, it's a church in Czechia, former Czech Republic. I'm sure the entire focusing on skulls is taking away some of the architecture behind it, but yeah, that's pretty intense. I like it. Oh, and there's even an HDR sphere for it. Yes. Yes. Sorry, give me a second. Open image in new tab. I am using this. That's awesome. And then there's a crucifix right in the middle. That's dark. Transfenestrate myself. Yeah. Yeah, don't do it. I'm just going to say, don't do it. You can certainly use it as a point of reference. So, actually, that's a good pivot point for me. I've had people attempt things like the Temple of Time from Ocarina of Time, the N64 version. Yeah, N64 version. Remember that you do have some constraints in this project, so it needs to be definable by silhouette. You have what I'll get to in a second is that you have a polygon budget. Original Ocarina of Time, most of the objects fall way underneath that sort of bare minimum. That being said, if you want to use, keeping with the Temple of Time reference, if you want to do the Temple of Time, but then pull in additional references from something that may not have a direct parallel, so like certain vases or glassware or whatever, I'm not looking for a accurate reproduction. I'm looking for a thematically consistent reproduction. So as long as you're not pulling in like steampunk into ancient Rome or high tech into a castle, you're fine. Just don't mix timelines. Last semester or spring I did the Cathedral of Light from WoW. Okay, definitely don't want to be referencing the real world version. Yeah. So this would be an instance where, or in terms of modularity, yes, absolutely. In terms of what is visible from this screenshot in order to reproduce it, obviously it's pretty barren. So you would have to source in additional references. Again, if you want to make things easier on yourself, this is a shot of the interior of the Pantheon in Rome, so the object that I'll be modeling or basing my model off of, with some of the assets highlighted. And this is a Roman throne room. So, as always, work cleanly and efficiently. Regarding object naming, eliminating n-gons, non-planar faces are going to become more of an issue now, especially if you start pushing into more organic shapes. So just make sure that your edges are true edges. You don't have any extreme non-planars. And for this assignment, removing any unseen faces. So back when I did the lamp, for example, I made the assumption that the lamp would be sitting on top of a table. That bottom face on the lamp's main body would never be seen. Rather than cap it to correct the n-gon, I just deleted it. So anytime there's a polygon on your object that will never see the light of day, make sure it's been removed. You have a triangle limit. So again, this is your budget per object, not overall, it's per object, of 1,600 triangles, 1,600 triangles per object. While optimization is always important, be sure that your objects are still identifiable without your reference and match the appearance or style of that reference image. So in other words, no Minecraft furniture. Use the 1,600 budget. Once you're ready to start duplicating, the original assets are to be placed outside of the structure itself, lined up next to one another, as you saw in this example and the other ones I'm about to show. You are then to model out the exterior superstructure of your building in pieces and instance them into place as needed. If you choose to create a structure other than Pantheon, you're free to do so. The 6 objects you choose to model should be able to appear by themselves in the scene without needing another object present to explain or support its function. Then I give the basic example of that velvet rope queue. Ideally, push a little farther than that, but it is an asset that's shown here. The velvet rope in between the 2 poles and 1 pole does not make a complete asset. That velvet rope needs to hang on to something on the other side. So both poles plus the rope, 1 asset. Just doing a quick draw over of the actual interior, showing where the breaks would be if you were to break this into a modular design. The scene you hand in will be a lineup of the unique assets and ceiling wall pieces, as well as duplicated instances, resulting in a complete scene. As a final step, you will navigate in your scene to create a camera that you feel best captures the atmosphere and grand scale of your room, and name it as a beauty shot camera. Pantheon or structure that you submit must be constructed from instance pieces, and grading will be reflective of the modular design and the aesthetic appeal of the assembled Pantheon. Just swap the look. It is recommended that you include at least 1 portal where daylight can enter your structure. So what I'll be grading you on, design and modeling of at least 6 objects with which to populate your structure. This does not include the structure itself. So if the only time that pillar appears is holding up the roof, it's part of the wall. If it's freestanding, then it's an asset, albeit a very simple one. Your objects should be recognizable from your reference images and by silhouette alone. Again, it's not all that likely that you guys will submit something that I've never seen before, although if you do, I'm certainly looking forward to it. But that's why you submit the references. So if there is something that I go, what's that? Just look at your reference. Again, it doesn't need to be a perfect reproduction. It's just giving me some background information of what you chose, or what you were going after. So I'll also be looking at the design and modeling of the structure itself. So walls, floor, ceiling, which has no poly limit. So walls, floor, ceiling, you can use as much geometry as you want. Just make sure that you're doing it efficiently. So if you have a straight cylinder going up and down, like these guys, has no subdivision down the middle, because it wouldn't be changing the silhouette. If you do add subdivisions, make sure you adjust them so that's contributing in some way. Otherwise, nix them. Look at your face or mesh efficiency and face cleanup. So what I just described, plus removing all of the hidden faces. your object naming. There shouldn't be any objects called box 001, cylinder 001, etc. The use and distribution of instance geometry. So when you're selecting your assets, don't have your master and then 2 in scene and call it a day. It's not getting very much mileage out of that model. You literally just copied it once. So put that into your considerations. The overall aesthetic appeal and camera use, which will be lightly graded. I'm not looking for you guys to be designers. I'm looking for you to be choosing your own references, making a model based off of them, and then using instancing to build out the structure and populate. And your consistent style, which is just, again, don't mix steampunk with ancient Roman, don't mix sci-fi with medieval. And again, I'd recommend you don't do sci-fi at all. It's very difficult. So what you're submitting to me is your 3D Studio Max file, which is your environment plus your assets, as well as all of your references inside a folder, inside a zip, 2 weeks plus 24 from today. Make sure that you're putting them in a folder, just to give you guys an idea as to why you're asked for this specific submission type. This is one person submission, so if you guys have played it, this is the throne room from Hades. And there's all of their reference photos. So realistically, the submission was 7 files total. If each person uses 7 or more files for their submission and no one zips them, I'm going to end up with 490 files being extracted to my grading directory, which becomes a nightmare, even assuming that none of them try to overwrite each other. So make sure that you're following the submission guidelines. That be it. Then I have a bit of a breakdown here. Damn, I wanted to try my hand at the House of Hades. You can. As long as the models that you submit were made by you. I imagine I'm going to get, like, depending on how ambitious people are, maybe at least 6 variations of the Pantheon per class. Again, if you do the Pantheon, that's completely acceptable. But that also means that a bunch of people are going to be on the same playing field, so you can give each other advice. Whereas if you choose to do something of your own choosing, so for example, this was another submission. It's Dragonhold from Dragonhold in Whiterun from Skyrim 4, Skyrim. Dragon's Reach. There you go. Alright. Yes, it is. Now, obviously this person already has their designs on being a level modeler or level artist. There's all of their level pieces. There's all their assets. There's the rest of their assets. So, went a little overboard. Again, I won't be looking at your structure from the exterior. My camera will always be inside. Was it a Unity render or an Unreal Engine render? Either way, yeah, they did an in-game render. Oh, the yellow things? Lights. You guys are not expected to be lighting it, but I will show you how. Yep. So if I go high quality. There it is. It would have been easier to just use an Omni, or a point light, depending on what program you're in, but I'm pretty sure they ended up doing the final lighting inside of their game, and inside of the game engine, and this was just a test. But this might sound weird, but can we make one with the style of sci-fi while also keeping it as a Pantheon? You do have the time to do it. Again, I would highly recommend against sci-fi. It's doable. It's just really, really, really difficult. Because again, each time you make something... Oh, I'm fine with the mix of genres. That's not what I'm worried about in the slightest. Not at all. It's just that, again, typically when you have sci-fi based stuff, as soon as you switch over to silhouette only, you end up with a bunch of boxes. Or boxes with a little bit of curve to them, or boxes with a little bit of chamfer on one side. It's just sci-fi tends to be incredibly clean and minimalist. That's the only issue. Especially with the 1600 poly count limit. Sorry, 1600 try count limit. Tries. I would do a model like this, but I took an arrow to the knee. Get out. Get out. So here's something a little more low scale. Again, I'm not looking for you guys to go crazy on this. You'll be able to, flex your skills after you've done this once. So concentrate rather more on getting this accomplished well, rather than making a masterpiece. So this one has a good variety of different levels. It's got the biped in here in order to be able to, in order for them to track their scale. There's stuff that's shorter than the they're shorter than the person, or shorter than an occupant. So sitting in a pew. There's stuff that's taller, and there's stuff that's much taller. So variety of levels. Model to floorboards, yeah. Again, all the pieces off to the side. So again, this is something that I could hand to one of you, say, go nuts, just like I did with the racetrack. And you'd be able to make something that's, aside from the effort behind the models themselves, the scene that you create would be completely unique to yourself. This is so intimidating, but I guess that's why we have 24 weeks plus 2 weeks plus 24 for it. Exactly. So we're running right at the exact timeline. No, I think I'm actually off by 4 minutes, but pretty much on the exact timeline as I did with section 1. So that is good. Just don't get overwhelmed. Break it down into modular bits. Okay, I'm gonna copy the clipboard. Never mind me taking pictures of my coral. I want that tattooed. If I plan to continue teaching, for a few more years, I want this tattooed. Because that is exactly it. Don't get overwhelmed. Break the project down into module bits and it's not so bad. Give me 1 second. There we go. So actually on that topic, or just because Shan said that, something that, so I sat in on a Ubisoft presentation on Monday. Oh, by the way, I'm going to actually just demonstrate for the next 30 minutes, so you guys don't have to try and watch and replicate it, just watch. I was sitting in with a Ubisoft presentation on Monday rather, and something that I really wish I had the ability to sort of take a clip of. So we had one of the technical artists from Ubisoft and their HR person talking to the third years. And one of the questions I was asked was, Maya versus Max versus Blender, what do you use, which should we learn, etc. And what the clip what Ben said, I forget his last name, but the gentleman's name was Ben. What he said is something else I would want to have tattooed is don't learn software, learn processes. You can be trained in software, but if you don't understand the underlying process, then it's going to be nearly impossible, which is completely accurate. Obviously, because he works at Ubisoft. But remember way back in first week, I don't want to teach you guys how to model everything. I want to teach you how to model anything and just the overall theory behind it. Theory sounds like something that you'd go to university for. There's, a lot of theory-based classes. But no, this is the theory of modeling. Start low, add iterative, or work iteratively, slowly build up form, slowly add detail. Don't jump all the way to the finished, or don't try to jump all the way to the finished project right at the start. Break it down into different pieces, etc. Don't mind me, I can. Yeah. You can watch a Blender tutorial, and if you know 3DCO Max, you mostly follow it in Max. Yeah. Slight terminology changes, and you guys have already seen some from me, since I'm not really Maya native, but for all intents and purposes, I'm Maya native. I say face instead of polygon. It's a translation. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to spend the last half hour working on this. So it's fine to start with the larger form and then break it down afterwards. So this is going to be my floor. And then, actually, I'll just do a duplicate. I'll do a copy, and this is going to be my wall. Scale it up. Now, currently, I don't know how big this is, so I need to have a frame of reference. So I'll just grab a box. Any size will do. The only value that I'm looking for is that height value. I said assume 1.8 meters or use your own height. So right now I'm doing a diorama. That doesn't work. Scale, 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 scale. Little too big. There we go. Since it's going to be a little easier to work with this as one-sided, those same steps that we used on the reference images for the A-wing, right-click, object properties. I'm going to turn on my backface cull, so the backside and negative normals of the mesh won't show. But right now, it is right side out. I need to flip it inside out. So I grab the full thing, flip, and now I can see inside. No problem. Go one more primitive to start working, because again, I'm going to be basing it off of the Pantheon in Rome. So it's got a spherical roof structure to it, as well as an oculus. So Convert. Take off the bottom half. I want to get it set perfectly on top of my ceiling piece. And you can do it by hand, but more than likely there's going to be some little gap or some overlap. If I want to do it absolutely mechanically perfect, Alt-A, I'm aligning it to my wall section. So line 2. I'm only moving it up and down. So axis of Y. I'm going for the minimum or bottom of my sphere to the maximum or top of my wall. Again, doesn't matter how precise you think you are, you're never going to beat that. So, grab my sphere, do the same thing, element flip, object properties, backface cull. Now I can see inside. I'm going to do all of this from scratch in the first 15-minute, or in the 15-minute wiggle room next class. So now I've got some geometry to start with with my walls. Kind of makes sense to have the ceiling open, or be able to see the ceiling rather. I'll just do a little bit of an extrude in. Maybe put a little bit of a rim on it, just so I can completely hide the transition between roof and wall. Just do another quick realign. And now I can start breaking things up. So one thing I didn't do is it would have been a lot better to have this divisible by 4. So I could go select 1/4, delete everything else. But part of the reason I do it this way is so that I can show you potential mistakes. So I'll go with the 2 polys, invert, delete. That's now going to be my master. So I'll pull out an instance copy. Because this was broken off of or originated from a complete object, the pivot point is already at the exact center, which means that if I turn on my angle snaps, do an instance, dial up my instancing, rip. Just gonna make sure that I don't have any overlapping, because I didn't actually count. Yep. So now when I go back to that master copy, again, be nice if this was oriented to world XYZ, but it ain't. I can start going inset. Delete. Set these to planar to make them completely flat. And then start pushing them back. Again, because it's instanced, I'll automatically get radial symmetry. Could also make a duplicate as a copy, just so you can actually see what I'm about to do. I'll change my colors. So maybe I don't want them all to be doors. Maybe I want this one section of wall to be flat, one section of wall to be an inset or an alcove. Target, or sorry, align to target. Grab that piece of wall, pivot, pivot, XYZ. delete the original, and make some copies. I think I need 4. Come on. Etc. Quick way to do variations. And it would help if those were instanced. Whoops. So I'm just watching for the color switch to know which one to delete. So grab, extrude, set it in, set it out, wherever you want to do. So the only thing that's missing would be the WASD, or the first person controller, or first person controls rather. So once you're ready to start navigating through your scene, or you want to start walking through it, switch over to a perspective camera, so P. In the bottom right, third icon, sorry, bottom row, third from the right, by default, it's going to be the hand icon for panning, which is just middle mouse button anyway. Click and hold on it. Switch it to the walk icon, sorry, the pedestrian walk, crosswalk icon, and that'll set you to first person mode. WASD will move you forward, back, strafe left, strafe right. Left mouse button will allow you to mouse look. Then E and C, Echo and Charlie, are float up and down. If you want to increase or decrease your rate of movement with the movement key held, so WASD, E, or C, tapping one of the square brackets, so left square bracket will slow you down, right square bracket will speed you up. So once you find something that you like, so if I were to continue with this, I'd probably want to have it focused on this variation of the wall, then have all of my little assets in here. I go views and create standard camera from view. You can make it physical if you want, but since we're not going to get into Arnold rendering, standard is fine. Now you can move around scenes, switch between orthographics, continue modeling, do whatever. So say I don't need these things anymore. Go backspace. And then as soon as I'm ready to see what my scene looks like, so I'll go File, Import, File, Import, Merge rather. I'll grab everything but the biped since I already have one in. There's that banner that I was making earlier. Instance. And one for the master. And there's my scene. And just keep working like that. Just make sure stuff isn't floating when possible. Same thing with this project as with the Normandy. You don't have to unwrap. Please don't. You don't have to texture. Please don't. All of your features should be coming through via geometry. So, any questions about the overall outline? Or any questions regarding the assignment itself? Okay, we send you pictures of settings to see if they are okay for use. Yep. So realistically, what I should have started with. So I did this so that you guys can see what could happen. Sides divisible by 4. 20 sides would be better. Align. Set my scales. Oops. Actually, use this, Shannon. If you want to just send them as direct messages via Discord, and then I'll just give you a quick feedback on that. Since I can do that while I'm doing feedback sessions, because I've actually already got people who have messaged me to get into queue. So realistically, again, four-sided, or sorry, divisible by 4, power of 4, makes it a lot easier. Bore edge, grow, up, grow. Get rid of everything else. I can take this guy, delete everything else. There's my new master. So if you're trying to do a rotation and it doesn't work perfectly, so I've still got a little bit of clipping in between the two, just adjust your clipping steps, so your snap steps. So it's that right click menu, options, angle snap, 2.5 degrees. Now it will work. Almost. Yes, I'm going to be particular about this. Damn. Anyway. There we go. So yeah, like I said, I'd have a little minute or a little bit at the end to answer any questions regarding the homework that's due tomorrow. Remember, I'm looking for silhouette, clean geometry, so no n-gons, any hidden faces, remove. If it's a straight edge, but it's been subdivided 6 times, that's wasting polys. Keep it under 6,000, but don't feel that you have to hit 6,000. As long as you've got the silhouette elements there, again, it's completely doable to do it in, again, I believe it was 3,800. Mainly there to keep you from over subdividing or trying to use mesh smooth on it. If you guys don't have any questions, you're good to go. Just remember, Normandy tomorrow, A-Wing Saturday. Yep. Yep. There is a little bit of perspective skew to it. So it's not just scale, but it's skew and scale. So none of your models will have calipers taken to them. As long as you're not, I think Max asked a question inside the Discord chat, and I said my response was, as long as the margin of error is centimeters to meters, so like if you're off by 2 centimeters on a meter large object, you're fine. If you're meters off of a meter object, so you're completely off the silhouette, then that's the issue. And Guy Squared is asking, other than modeling the inside, do we do the outside too, or no? Nope, just this. I will never bring my camera or assess it from the exterior, even if you have an open hole. So I'll just rerun that inset. Okay, got this zeroed. Yep. You're not required to do anything original from the examples I've shown you. So if you do have like entryways or transitions to other structures, you don't need to do those other structures. So like don't do anything past this room. And then from the samples, I just went through and I drew over some other examples. So this is the Goldshire Inn, I believe. Watch your snaps. So if your edges aren't lining up, I'll mark you down for it. If you need to source from other material, as long as it's not a clash of settings, you're good to do so. Next week Next week I'll do some really basic soft body stuff, so cloth, without running it through a simulation. And then the first time I ran this, so this example is 5 years old. They did Yorn's Throne Room from before Dark Souls 3 was even out. So, with their wireframes. Professionally or in the school? Usually it's your art lead or your team art lead. Typically. Usually a lead has some experience under their belt, so assuming that it's not a venue that they haven't done before, like if they've been doing, you know, pixel art games the entire time and then they switched to 3D, or if they've been doing like 3D puzzle mobile games and then they switched to first person 3D, obviously there's going to be a disconnect there, but it's usually your lead. And it's less that they will give you a poly budget and more that they'll give you points of reference. So a little harder. No problem, Kiss a Jeweler. So I'm just going to keep mulling. I'm going to do this all again from scratch next class. But yep, collapse will work for more than 2 vertices as long as they share at least one edge. Collapse will weld down multiple verts. Alrighty. So I've already got a couple messages. Obviously, you guys can see my system bar. I've already got a couple messages for one-on-one feedback on Discord. I'm going to end the stream in, well, I'll end it shortly after I'm done speaking. I'll go have a quick cigarette, grab some water, and then I'll be on Discord. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow at 3 for Textro. Sounds good.